Aloha, and thank you for joining us. We are so happy to have you, and so happy to have our host here, our moderator, Keani Rawlins-Fernandez. And I'm going to stop sharing my poster here. Thank you so much, Council Vice Chair Keani Rawlins-Fernandez, for moderating this event. And I'm going to turn it over to you. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Shay. And aloha and welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to moderate today's panel. Mahalo nui, Shay and Ian, for inviting me and extending this privilege. I'm really excited about this discussion that we're about to have. I'm Keani Rawlins-Fernandez. I was born and raised on Molokai. And I serve on the Maui County Council as the Council Vice Chair and the Chair of the Budget, Finance, and Economic Development Committee. And Todd will kind of go more into some of the background of Molokai and what makes Molokai so special, and some of our community's goals relevant to today's discussion. Last year, I had the opportunity to host an in-person panel about the history of investment in Hawaii and the meaning of ahupua'a investment. The ahupua'a model involves acknowledging that everything is connected, cultivating a relationship with the aina and natural elements, and working together with the aina and elements to promote abundance. From this perspective, our Oiwi ancestors approached the ahupua'a by investing positive inputs. The ahupua'a from the lewalani, which is the Earth's atmosphere, cycles pure water to the forest. The trees, moss, and other plants absorbs what it can, sending down water into the aquifer, and the excess flows down the mountain where Kanaka built a way to direct the water into the lo'i kalo, both promoting more aquifer recharge via permaculture and increasing the amount of nutrients that flow down into the muliwai, the brackish water in the ocean that feed the limu, the seaweed, which in turn feeds the baby fish. The lo'i kalo also helps recharge impounded waters to increase the flow of springs that Kanaka built loko'i'a, fish ponds around, which again creates the just the right brackish water environment to promote limu growth that attract the baby fish. This approach is almost the opposite of what we see today, where the laws established protect us from preventing too much negative inputs, such as pollution going downstream, affecting downstream users. And it also takes us from the standpoint of scarcity. How much water are we able to extract until we permanently destroy our aquifer? And so I love this ahupua'a approach, ahupua'a model, and the ESG model that we'll be talking about today. Today, we will be joined by 3 panelists with a great deal of social responsibility investment expertise, and 3 in the trenches of Hawaii-based knowledge and experience, ranging from the regulatory to countywide and community-driven renewable energy development. Among the questions we will be addressing this morning are: why is Maui County's geographic isolation and economic and innovation advantage? How can Native Hawaiian and community ownership of assets be supported? What types of investments and funding are available for community-based infrastructure and renewable energy projects? And to the panelists, please excuse me in advance if I interrupt you to explain any terminology that may be new to people, to our audience, as I want to be sure that all of our audience, regardless of their background and experience, are able to fully understand and appreciate the discussion. And one last thing, if you have any questions, audience members, if you have any questions during the presentation, please either post them in the Q&A, or if you are on Facebook, you may post your questions in the comment section. And then depending on our time constraints, we will either answer them at the end of the panel or directly after. We'll begin our conversation on Molokai. Like many residents of the island and in Maui County as a whole, Todd Yamashita, a fourth-generation Molokai resident and father of 2 young boys, serves many roles in our community. He's a founding member and volunteer board president of Ho'ahu Energy Cooperative Molokai. He is also the publisher of the Molokai Dispatch, Molokai Director of Operations for Hawaii Marine Animal Response, and a worldwide voyager on the Hawaiian canoe Hokule'a. Todd has a background in communications, outreach, marketing, design, and fundraising. And so we'll start with our first question. Todd, will you please start us off by telling us a little bit about Ho'ahu Energy Co-op, why it's important to Molokai residents, and the co-op's opportunities and challenges?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Keani. And I just wanted to thank everybody for coming together today and thank this group for, shedding some light on Molokai. I think we're doing some pretty amazing things here. And I hope to share that with you guys really quickly through a presentation to help answer that question that you just answered or asked me. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and tell you guys about Ho'ahu Cooperative Molokai. Okay, so this is the backside of Molokai, one of the most beautiful places I know. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. So I was just gonna really quickly tell you about our island. We have our nickname is Aina Momona, which means the bountiful earth. It's one of many nicknames that we have. The island is the 5th largest of the major Hawaiian islands, and we're directly in the middle of the island chain. Well, population of about 7,200. Who are we? Molokai is indigenous. We're 62% by population Hawaiian. We are farmers, subsistence, hunters, gatherers. We're definitely a rural people, and I would say for the most part, we try to live by the values of our culture. Our people understood that their lives and the life of the land were inextricably linked and perpetuated through stewardship. Molokai made its mark at the beginning of the Aloha Aina movement in the 1970s. The movement succeeded in guaranteeing Native Hawaiian gathering rights and shoreline access statewide, and will go on to defeat the US military by ending its target bombing on Kaho'olawe. It was this fight that helped galvanize a renaissance in Hawaiian culture that is ongoing and evolving today. However, there really remains a lot of struggles here on Molokai. In the past year, the prices for freight, food, and gas have absolutely skyrocketed. Unfortunately, our island-wide poverty rate is just about at 19%, where the nationwide is about 10%. In terms of energy, Molokai people use the least amount of electricity per capita, and we are rewarded with some of the highest prices in the nation. So, we've learned from our kupuna that we need to protect the things that we love. At the center of this is our community. It's our friends, our family, and the people who we love. And so the question isn't whether we should act or not to serve our people, to help ourselves. To honor our kupuna and our future generations, we must act. We must push back against oppression. Simply, we need to succeed to survive. The sun, the wind, the rain, and other energy sources in the public realm, we believe should benefit the communities and future generations who steward and safeguard these vital resources. our relationship with energy must be inclusive and complementary to a healthy healthy community and environment. Molokai has been without controversy for about a decade now. And in this space, we ask, what is the path back to abundance? How do we honor our kupuna who have done the hard work to keep our open spaces and our vibrant culture? How do we transition from a reactive to a proactive community? So we look towards Mauna Kea, Kuhuku, Standing Rock. We look at how energy and science have a responsibility in putting their communities up front at the top of the process. We realize that there is no justice without equity, and that flipping the script from extraction to empowerment is the only way forward. So on Molokai, we're taking the reins of our energy future by embracing a grassroots cooperative model that's really new to Hawaii's growing renewable energy market. We're a consumer-based co-op that is community-led and community-focused. And we're right now defining what it means to be truly community-owned. So community-based renewable energy, or CBRE, is an energy program created so that grid-scale energy projects can directly benefit subscribers. So basically with CBRE, renters and other people who can't typically install solar and take advantage of solar where they live, they can still take advantage of solar and energy savings from projects that are built and operated on their behalf. So it's kind of like a virtual solar program. Last year, HECO announced a 2.75 megawatt CBRE program for Molokai, which is about 20% of Molokai's energy needs. And so our volunteer community energy group, which has been meeting for years now, we decided like this is the catalyst. We've got to come together. This is a great reason, you know, to build something that can create equity for our community. So by taking the role of the project leader, our nonprofit co-op can drive more value and cost savings for our subscribers and reduce energy costs, hopefully by 10% or more for more than about 1,400 households. So we're hoping to hit at least half of Molokai, reduce that energy bill for just about everybody. Ho'ahu, basically our name, it means to collect, to compile, to gather, to lay away, to store away. As future farmers of the sun, our Hawaiian practitioners gifted us this beautiful name in the spirit that comes with it. So Ho'ahu's success right now is being determined by our ability to engage and inform our community, as well as to take on energy partners who share our values and empower us with the expertise and tools that we need to compete with on these technical projects. Some of these partners, Shake Energy, we have 2 energy partners that we've taken on, and it took us about a year really to research and filter through who it is that we should partner with. So really quickly, Shake Collaborative is a woman-owned public benefit energy developer, and Mana Pacific is a social impact and benefit corporation. And so you can see that, you know, we chose developers who share our values. So workforce development is something, is another area that we have already partnered with Maui County, thanks to some of the work that we've done with Keani and the Maui County Council. We have recently gotten funding to help empower some of our local people here, give them the tools and the training that they need, so that no matter who builds these future projects for Molokai, that our guys here on Molokai will have the first crack at some of these jobs and stuff like that. And you guys, real quick, this is just a sketch of our 2.5 megawatt plus power storage plant. So this is just kind of gives you a visual idea of what it is that we're trying to build. And yesterday, our community had a 3-hour session with the Public Utilities Commission. It was a status conference, and the PUC itself described it as unprecedented. And, you know, so we've started a dialogue that puts the community further towards the front of the process, and we're using this space to push really hard so that projects include increased community benefit and value. So, you know, in order to succeed right now, we need to build capacity. We need to find financial partners that complement who we are, complement our lifestyle, complement our culture, and find value in our social impact story. And you know, the thing about this project that I think is really important for us here on Molokai is that it goes beyond Molokai. This is not just about us guys over here. Everything that we're doing is we're trying to push the envelope. We're trying to get the community at the front of these larger projects so that there's less of this friction. There's less of this stress on our smaller communities. And so we're sharing out everything that we're doing with a broader network of people throughout the state and trying to empower them as well. I hope I didn't go too far over time, but and I hope that also answers your question, Keani.
Mahalo, Todd. Yeah, in the Ahupu'a model, who are our downstream users? They are our children, our future generations. So mahalo for underscoring that in your presentation, Todd. My second question for you is what kinds of support do you need in the short and long term, particularly when it comes to capacity building and investment?
That's a really good question. Short and long term. So for our CBRE project, our goal really is community ownership through the co-op model. We truly want our people to own this project. And so majority ownership that we would need for that project would come from upfront buy-in from our subscribers. We are engaging with the Hawaii GEMS, then that stands for the Hawaii Green Infrastructure Authority. That's a fund here in Hawaii that's created to support subscriber and ratepayer kind models and stuff like that. So we're using that to help with on-bill financing so that people who basically engage or become a subscriber, they can see their savings and everything on the same electric bill that they get from that utility. We're also looking for like regular debt, USDA low interest, and especially grants. We need grants. Just, you know, it's free, not free money, but it's practically free money that builds values on behalf of, you know, of our people. So, however, you know, as the name implies, Oahu is a lot bigger than the CBRE project, and we're looking down the road for like the next 40, 50 years of energy on Molokai. And it goes beyond just the conversation of these utility projects and large scale utility projects. We actually have a whole portfolio of projects that we're looking at down the road. And you know, if I were actually to put a number on it, let's just say, you know, $10 to $20 million roughly is kind of what we're looking for. You know, and so the challenge is really to find investors who will work with somebody new, where we really don't have a track record. We're hoping that the CBRE project will be our kind of like our foot in the door. We need somebody who will let us be flexible with our money, and who might seek an alternative to typical returns. You know, like social impact. The story of what we're doing, I think, is really unique. And not just like I said, not just empowering for our community, but empowering for Hawaii in general, and hopefully other smaller indigenous communities throughout the world. So, you know, and what do I have to say about the risk of working with someone new? I just want to say we're worth the risk. You know, this is a grassroots effort that's coming directly from the community. We've been doing the really heavy gauging, the heavy lifting by engaging our community, and making sure that everything has been transparent throughout. And you know, we're vested. We need to succeed to survive, right? So you can guarantee that we're going to make this work one way or the other. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, mahalo. We're all directly invested in the success of our community. And another way to look at grants is it's our way of collectively investing in projects that bring the most value to all of us in the county, or statewide, as you stated. And with social impact investment, some of those returns have collective benefit. And so and it's something that we'll hear more about. And before I introduce our next panelist, I would like to again encourage our audience to post their questions in the comments on Facebook or in the chat or the Q&A on Zoom, and we'll get to those. Our next panelist is Stephanie Gribney, founder of and CEO of the Impact Finance Center, a nonprofit academic center that identifies, trains, and activates philanthropists and investors to become impact investors. Stephanie also has a background in forestry and ranching. From what I know so far, it sounds like Stephanie is working on many projects that could be beneficial to our community. But for now, can you please provide ideas about how to help groups like Ho'ahu that have not yet built up credit rating that is generally needed for debt financing, particularly when the community wants to retain most of the equity and control?
Thank you, Keani. It's an honor to be with you today, and I'm going to share a few slides, and then I'll get to the answer to your first question. But I asked the audience a question about how many millionaires are there in Hawaii? And I don't know the answer. I just Googled it before this presentation, and I got 41,000 millionaires in Hawaii. And there are certainly tens of thousands of more millionaires that visit Hawaii every year. And so that leads me to ask the question of why don't we see more money just easily flowing into projects such as the one Todd was just talking about. And that was my aha about a decade ago. I was a professor at University of Colorado, and I had completed hundreds of transactions. And I just took a step back and I said, Todd is doing amazing work. Why isn't money just rushing like a river towards this project? And this is going to sound silly, but where do the millionaires go to learn how to invest in projects such as the cooperative, the energy cooperative? Turns out there's not a lot of trustworthy investor education places for them to go learn, to identify them, educate them, and activate them. So it's, in some ways, we spend most of our time building up just the people who need the money, and we forget that the people who have the resources, who might care about Hawaii, indigenous communities, and climate, for example, they have the money, but they don't know how to invest in you. And so that was, I took a left turn in my career about 10 years ago and started a multi-university nonprofit center. There's only 15 centers in the country that work on financial innovation, impact investing. And I thought to myself, every university, every community needs one of these centers. So our mission is to identify, educate, and activate individuals and organizations with resources to become impact investors and unlock full spectrum catalytic capital. And then I'll have a quick case study of what we did in Colorado here, where we then create community infrastructure like farmers markets, where the investors can come and we call them asset stewards, can come meet the community stewards and find ways to invest in one another. And so our theory of change is very simple. We try to identify wealthy individuals, families, corporations, and foundations. We educate them and we activate them. Because we're not raising a fund, we're not trying to become the investment advisor. We call ourselves non-conflicted investor education. And we do this by evaluating their investment advisor. And we have 200 classes, 50 are recorded up on our institute. And then we do one-on-one training, small group training, and large group training. And so here's an example of what we call full spectrum catalytic capital. Teresa at the Walton Family Foundation, who is the biggest funder of sustainable seafood and oceans globally, 7 to 12 million in grant funding she gives away every year, calls me and says, Stephanie, I have $2,500. You have to teach me how to do this. Now, when I think of Teresa, I think of baseball. And I was presenting to the 3M company recently, which is why I have the Minnesota Twins. And when I think of Teresa, she's major league when it comes to intelligence. She's major league when it comes to alignment and mission. She's major league with access to money. But her experience of writing a $250,000 check to a sustainable seafood cooperative, she's not major league. She's actually at T-ball of doing a loan, for example. And so I said, she said $2,500. I said 10 sessions. That launched our one-on-one training. She's so smart in major league in so many ways. All she needed was a little coaching to learn how to do more than just grant funding. And she decided to do a $500,000 negative 50% return investment to a for-profit sustainable seafood company. Internally, we framed this as a grant that could be a recoverable grant and get paid back, so we wouldn't put any red flags with the attorneys. Externally, we approached the for-profit sustainable seafood company and said, we'll do a loan with impact milestones. If you do more and more impact, we'll forgive up to 50% of the loan, hence a negative 50% return. Most people don't realize the financial return of a grant is negative 100%, as well as in a large company, an HR dollar, an R&D dollar, a corporate social responsibility dollar. So we then go and argue a negative 50% return is an above market rate return to a negative 100% loss. And so that's the concept of full spectrum capital. Then we take it one step further. We evaluate investment advisors. This is a $15 million foundation in Denver, Colorado, and they have their time, their talent, and their money. We have 85 tools in our toolbox. We determined that their investment advisor is overcharging them $230,000 over 7 years to underperform by $1.4 million. We try to upgrade the investment advisor. They don't want to be upgraded. So we say, we're going to recommend they fire you. They fire them, we find a new one. Then we get all of the money going into alignment with participatory grant making, direct investing, and the money left in the stock market is as impactful as possible. So we work to keep that money aligned. What do you do after you identify, educate, and activate 150 investors? They want to go find opportunities like Todd. So in Colorado, we had a 3-year goal to catalyze 100 million. We ended up doing 200 education classes in person. We found 650 local opportunities. We activated 155 investors, and then we just brought good people together to meet really good people in a farmer's market style. And we catalyzed over 330 million, which was our financial goal. And if you look at the tools, we have like an investor accelerator where groups use a giving circle model, except instead of giving the money, they full spectrum invest it, maybe a negative 10% investment. We create, instead of a marketplace, we do small investor clubs, which you could create on Molokai. We create Main Street character-based lending programs, and we're now rolling out community notes and guarantee models. And the community notes and guarantee models are saying we have amazing nonprofit lenders and community financial development institutions, and we just need to go raise the money so they can lend and make full spectrum investments. So, which is super exciting.
Mahalo, Stephanie. That's so incredible. Yes.
And what's beautiful about it, the community infrastructure we've developed is customizable, participatory. You can take it and you can make it your own and put your own spin and version on it.
Mahalo for that presentation. My second question is, will you please tell us a little bit about how you help shift the way donors and investors make a difference in the community and get a financial return?
Absolutely. So I'll give you a real life case study with the Reese Foundation. They introduced us to Awista Corporation, which is a native community financial development institution. And in the last 25 years, they've lent $79 million to over 69 native CDFIs. And this year, with our support, they raised $27 million to support native CDFIs. So we had another foundation in our fellowship program. And so this is where we want to support you all, creating your investor training programs. The Reese Foundation comes to us and their brother and sister, and they said, we want to invest in Indigenous communities. And they said, and I said, well, there's 85 tools in our toolbox over governance, philanthropy, direct investing, and public investments. What do you want to do? And they say, well, we're thinking we'd like to do a loan to a nonprofit, an investment into Awista. And they said, what about a $50,000 grant and a $100,000 2% loan? And I said, that's amazing. But two things, you're in a full spectrum fellowship, not a bifurcated capital fellowship. And shouldn't we go talk to Awista and ask them what they actually want and need? And they said, absolutely. They're the most lovely brother and sister. They said, drive on up to Longmont, Colorado, put us on Zoom, have an open-ended conversation, explain full spectrum negative 100% capital. And we did. And I was like, Crystal, what do you really need? And I said, for every $100 you bring in the door, they said, we need $25 of grants and $75 of 2% loans. And I said, okay. And I put it through my little full spectrum calculator. I'm like, you need negative 24% return investment, which before this minute meeting me, you would have thought that's a horrible return, but a negative 24% return investment is 76% increase to giving your money away. We go back to the brother and sister and say, they need negative 24% money. I said, what were you offering them? 50 at negative 100 of a grant, 100 at 2. That's 150,000 at negative 32%. They don't need negative 32. They need negative 24. Do you own any private prisons or something horrible in the stock market you want to sell? What would you like to get on your stock market portfolio this year? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 6? Give me $40,000, divest out of the stock market, blend it with a $100,000 2% loan and a $50,000 grant. Now we'll be able to give them $190,000 at negative 24% return, and you still get market rate returns on all 3 of your buckets.
That is so incredible. Mahalo for sharing all of that with us. We're so fortunate to have you on this panel today.
No, thank you for having me.
Mahalo, Stephanie. Our next panelist is Kate Finn, Executive Director at First Peoples Worldwide, which provides tools and resources for investors, companies, and financial institutions to increase understanding about the ways to include Indigenous peoples in project design in accordance with the principle of free, prior, and informed consent as enumerated in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Kate, you recently worked on a report called Harnessing Private Equity for Indigenous Peoples that focused on renewable energy investments in Indian country. My first question is, will you please share with us the principle of free, prior, and informed consent from the UN Declaration of Independence and how it plays a role in private equity?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. It's such an honor to join everyone here today. As Keani said, I'm the Executive Director of First Peoples Worldwide, which is a program out of the University of Colorado at Boulder, but was a nonprofit for 20 years prior. So we have a lot of work working with Indigenous peoples. And our mission is to work from a foundation of Indigenous values to achieve a sustainable future for all. And that creates a really big umbrella that we get to do creative design work under all day long. But what we do every day is work to build capacity for Indigenous peoples, work to build capacity for investors, and then create a platform for the two to connect. And to do so in a way that's consonant with the human rights of Indigenous peoples and the values of the individual communities. And it's just my honor to work with so many distinct Indigenous peoples and Native movements in all of that. So it's kind of fun day to day to see who's doing what, how, and where, and to learn more on this panel. So I will dive right in now to FPIC. What is FPIC? It's a big word, but it's a little word. What do we do? So free, prior, and informed consent is enumerated in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, of course. But really what it is an exercise of self-determination. And it's a safeguard of all of the rights of Indigenous peoples. So when FPIC is done correctly, what it does is it allows Indigenous peoples to create and to design and to amplify their own economic development priorities. and to do so in a way that's consonant with their values. So with their own cultural values, spiritual values, environmental values, whatever that is. So it prioritizes Indigenous leadership. When operationalized, FPIC prioritizes decision-making and the participatory rights of Indigenous peoples. So it creates a framework. And so I guess part of this and what we kind of sought to do with our private equity research is we said, wait a minute, FPIC is important. We've been working on this for decades. How can we bring this to a financial model? How can we bring this in? How can we use FPIC as a design tool to really amplify decision-making and participatory rights? And we were able to create some research around that. So just, you know, FPIC is both a process and a right, right? It's free, prior, and informed consent. All of that takes a process. It's negotiating, it's understanding, it's giving and sharing information, integrating that information into a design process, creating moments of dialogue and discussion. And then at the end of the day, it's creating a moment where everyone at the table says yes, no, conditional yes, conditional no. What is that? So it's understanding going into a process that there will be a moment of yes or no. And it's really making sure that there's equity in the entire process and equity in the outcome. So what it can do in this space in terms of finance and investing is it can create a fair and cognizable framework and like a governance structure so that during deal engineering, there's value for all the parties. There's economic value that's spoken of. There's social value, you know, everything is on the table. And that framework allows everyone to participate. You know, what we know is that deal structures have largely been imported from extractive industries. And now as we move towards renewable industries and other types of economic diversification, let's not just import that same model. There's a moment that we can have right now and that I think investors are ready for, particularly ESG investors, to disrupt. And FPIC is one way to set up a framework and a governance system to do that.
I love that. Mahalo, Kate. My second question is, while Ho'ahu's project is fairly small from a private equity perspective, our community does have larger long-term plans, as do other communities in Maui County. Do you see a pathway for Indigenous-focused private equity to meet our community needs according to our community's values?
Absolutely. And I want to, press on Todd's point earlier that, things that can happen here in Molokai can be a model for Indigenous peoples around the world. It's really about disrupting this pattern and this way of investing that's happened all over the place. So this is a point of inflection that I think can create a model that's really important. And I think there's a huge role for private equity in that. Building an Indigenous-centered governance structure starts when the capital stack starts. It's everything that Stephanie was saying, right? When you're looking at grants, there's grantors that want to create impact, and you get to be the impact, and how do you drive that? And then moving through, as you move through the capital stack to integrated capital, to debt capital, to private equity, it's creating the structure that can thread through so that you make sure that the values and the goals are also threaded through the entire project. And I think a lot of it is about recharacterizing the way that equity is thought of. So, equity is, of course, the financial returns. It's all that, but it's also, what have Indigenous peoples, what do people bring in? Well, how are resources valued? Because they're valued different by different parties. So let's have a conversation about that. How are we going to measure value? What is the equity? It's the personnel and the resources that people bring as much as the money that they're bringing to the table too. Creating a conversation around that. And I think private equity is so interesting because it can be flexible, right? So you have a moment where you can decide how equity is captured, when it's captured, and you can really make those conversations, live conversations. It's difficult, it's different, but it's disruptive by design, and that's the point. And I think Stephanie's point is well taken, that there's investors who are ready to do this and have this conversation. So I think that private equity is a way to test and bake in a lot of the things that create values alignment and return alignment as well. And I think, my final point, in terms of this community too, it's so common, and you have long-term goals, right? Your goals and your shareholders are your community, they're your children. They're the people that you're creating value for, and private equity is the long-term strategy as well. So I think it just goes back to the idea that using free, prior, and informed consent as a governance structure helps you to reach those goals with clarity, and that in a way that's cognizable to ESG investors.
That's beautiful. I love, expanding our way of thinking of this, extractive capitalistic model, where a tree that, contributes to our survival on this earth under an extractive capitalistic model doesn't have value until it's cut down and sold as lumber, right? And so I mahalo for sharing that. My last question is, do you see added value for investors in Indigenous communities?
Absolutely. So, there's a lot of statistics out there, and one of them that's out there a lot is that, Indigenous peoples steward a small percentage of the earth, but actually 80% of biodiversity is left in Indigenous lands, right? So the resources that we need to all live together on this planet are stewarded by Indigenous peoples. And there's a lot of economic opportunity, but there's a lot of opportunity for understanding what that stewardship is. So I think, there's going to be more attention to Indigenous lands, and investors have a key role in helping to elevate stewardship. And one thing that we put forward in our research is that any investment in Indian country is an impact investment. And I think that's true in Indigenous communities around the world, right? So where there's, a history of extraction, whether it be financial, whether it be the actual earth, whatever it is, we have to change that. We have to do that. And ESG investors are in a place to understand that the I can be threaded through ESG, and to do that in a really good way. So I think that there's a really ripe opportunity to align values and economic opportunities to do that. And I guess just from a very smaller risk management perspective, when investors can look at FPIC, when they can ask Indigenous peoples, what are your values? Where are you seeing things? They can understand the totality of the risks that they're taking on, and understand the totality of what's going on, so that they know, they have a fiduciary duty to their own shareholders to understand what that is. And I think including Indigenous peoples from the earliest points of any investment or project design is important from that. But I guess, the point that I think is the most salient here is that FPIC is a framework for deal engineering that creates equity. And I think that it allows ESG investors to amplify their values, and to really find and create a right platform with Indigenous peoples to forward Indigenous peoples' priorities and goals.
Wonderfully stated. Yeah, in that ESG investment ahupua model, when Indigenous peoples succeed in Malama Aina, everyone benefits, right? In the ahupua model I explained earlier, where with the lo'i kalo and recharging our aquifer, everyone benefits from more water in our aquifer. Mahalo, Kate. When we talk about investment that meets community needs, we often hear that places like Molokai, where communities are fiercely protecting their cultural and environmental resources, are anti-investment or anti-development. Reframed correctly, we are actually pro-responsible investment when projects are structured to create community ownership and align with our Ahupua values. We also often hear that we won't be able to find investors with the experience, skills, and creativity to both achieve a reasonable financial return while simultaneously supporting the goals of our communities, because investors need to make money. Jason Scott is a principal at Renewable Resource Group and co-chair of the CREO Syndicate and has an extensive background in impact and ESG investing. Aloha, Jason. Will you please tell us how investors could build value in an isolated island community with strong cultural traditions such as Molokai?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'm not in an isolated island community. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, so it's very loud right now, as Ian and Shay know from visiting me here. But I'm excited to talk about this, and I appreciate the chance to hear the other presentations first. I think they're great examples of things that investors are actually looking for now. That's quite different from what they've been looking for in the past. I think there's two really big trends that if you haven't heard about them or are worth looking into. One is investors looking for investments that are what people are calling now net zero. So from a carbon perspective, so carbon neutral, carbon negative. And I think the energy and energy storage projects that you all are talking about are perfect examples of that. And then I think more broadly on the ESG side, projects that incorporate local ownership, community ownership, and indigenous communities into the design, the development, and the management of those assets are becoming increasingly important as well. If you look at what's happened in the past in things like the carbon and biodiversity markets, if you look at things around sustainable fisheries and other things I think would be quite applicable to Hawaii generally and Molokai specifically, I think there are lots of opportunities for investors to achieve both these goals around net zero, but also around local ownership and governance of assets. And I would say that the opportunities in those areas, the people looking for opportunities in those areas can be described as both kind of large institutional asset owners. So people like pension funds and endowments, some of whom are doing things that are not very good or very responsible, as we know from some of the activities around Maui that you all have written, or that Ian and Shay have written about for sure, and that you all are very aware about, very aware from a governance perspective. But a lot of those long-term investors are looking for assets now that are net zero, ESG compliant, and taking much more seriously some of the governance and environmental considerations. I don't think the Trinitas project would have been able to go forward in kind of this current environment from a governance perspective. So, but there are also, in addition to pensions and endowments, are family offices and large fund managers. So the CREO Syndicate, which you mentioned, is a network of family offices. It's about 130 family offices around the world who are interested in sustainable investing. And more of those are writing checks all the way from the size that Stephanie was talking about, kind of on the much smaller size with very innovative structures, grants, concessionary capital, all these kinds of things that the panel's been talking about, but also very mainstream investments seeking commercial return. And I actually do think that some of the projects that you all are describing could achieve commercial returns if people have the right approach. People, meaning investors, have the right approach to local ownership, long-term returns, and other attributes that are aligned more with community ownership and ESG principles. So I think as people start trying to really adhere to those guidelines and start really trying to find assets and opportunities that are aligned with them, I think a lot of the projects that are possible on Molokai and other places in Maui and around Hawaii are incredibly commercial. But some of that is because investors are changing how they define what is commercially viable.
Mahalo, I love that. My second question is, how could a comprehensive transition to sustainability and power, transportation and agriculture within Molokai island geography be financed?
So I think what's exciting about a system like Molokai, in a way which is a closed system, in a lot of ways, certainly when it comes to things like energy, food, and transport, is that more and more people meaning investors again, are looking for opportunities in what we would call sustainable infrastructure. The firm that I work with, Renewable Resource Group, that's what we invest in. We invest mostly in production agriculture and water resources, but we also invested in renewable energy, and we partner with other investment managers who are interested in the same thing. And what's super exciting about Molokai, I think, is that with the natural resources that you have, with the ability to generate power and electricity from solar, with battery storage, with water, with productive agricultural land, the community could theoretically support itself with the right kind of long-term capital that's aligned with local community ownership. And I think that it might not have been possible even 5 or 10 years ago because of how investors would look at something like Molokai and think, well, how do I generate a really quick return? How do I sell this asset to someone else? But if you can create a truly sustainable infrastructure with profitability, but that is very long-term and grows at a slow and reasonable and appropriate rate over time, I think you could find capital from mainstream private investors that would support this kind of closed, sustainable system on Molokai. But even better, I think the grants, concessionary capital, other types of structures we've been talking about before are available as well. And the final piece of the puzzle, and this was mentioned on the energy side, is we do now have a supportive federal government when it comes to things like USDA grants and loans, low cost loans for renewables and solar. And even if some of those things were available before, I think with the money that's coming through the various recovery acts, interest in investing in community development, financial institutions, tax credits, grants and loans, I think there's an incredible opportunity to package those types of state and local and federal incentives with commercial capital to build long-term infrastructure that's owned by local communities, that adheres to these ESG standards, and that generates a fair rate of return for investors, not an extractive or what I would say is unfair rate of return to the local owners. So I think it's a really exciting time to be thinking about what you're thinking about, both in terms of what broader capital markets are doing and thinking about, but also in terms of how state, local, and federal governments are thinking about how to support those investments.
Absolutely, it's such great timing. What a difference in federal leadership it can make when leadership believes that climate change is real and investing in our, nation's infrastructure has long-term benefit. My last question for you, Jason, is given some of the negative experiences we've had here in Maui County, can you tell us how the community can provide clear rules of the road and accountability mechanisms to ensure that our values and expectations are met?
That is a very good and very difficult question. And I've heard a lot of the examples that people have mentioned today in terms of Indigenous leadership and community ownership. Sometimes it's hard to get that local alignment and local leadership. So if you don't have local alignment and local leadership, then people, again, meaning investors and other operators, can exploit that and I think use that against the community. So I think if there is community alignment, it is very, very powerful to form a partnership with private capital. I do think that whether it's formally through nonprofit associations, through, as we mentioned before, community development financial institutions, whether it's through cooperatives owned by workers, owned by the community, there needs to be a counterparty or an entity that a private investor can negotiate with. And I think if that counterparty has the affirmative consent of the local community, then it's a really exciting partner. I think where it gets difficult is when there's the opportunity to kind of exploit differences in the local community. And I think that's what we've seen in some of the projects in other parts of Hawaii, where somehow one was able to pit local community interests against each other. And that's why I think this whole idea of having a sustainable, again, not totally closed, but kind of closed investment strategy and community where everything complements each other. So where food and water, where agriculture and energy, where transportation, where they reinforce each other in positive ways, and all the stakeholders are bought in, keeps outside forces from dividing the community. So I think the most important thing is to have some type of entity that private capital can transact with, and then have that entity aligned internally. You will never have unanimity in any community, but some type of entity where there's like real alignment is, I think, the critical missing part of any partnership with private capital.
Great points. Mahalo, Jason. Our next panelist is Jennifer Potter, who has served as the Hawaii Public Utilities Commissioner since March of 2018. Commissioner Potter is also a resident of Maui County and is committed to achieving Hawaii's ambitious renewable energy goals in a manner that benefits Hawaii's people. Given the statewide goal of 100% renewable energy by 2045 and the related goal of electrifying transportation in Hawaii, we need to significantly accelerate innovation. My question for you is similar to the last one I asked Jason. How can the isolated electric transport and telecom grids found within Maui County and on Molokai be utilized to promote and validate innovation?
I want to thank you all so much for your excellent presentation so far, and then asking me to join you today. So it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the very complex and complicated question. I appreciate it. So I want to first begin with the concept, and one thing that rang absolutely true yesterday during the status conference that Todd was speaking about earlier was that, one size does not fit all. And it certainly, it's like there's a path from A to B, but it is not necessarily a straight line. And this is definitely the case with Molokai, and it's also the case with Maui County in general. And so there's a unique community in Molokai that just really has a strong and persistent voice that's developed over, as Todd mentioned, the last decade. And developing community groups that have come together to speak their truth and to express the needs of their community. And that has been innovative in its own right. I mean, this is something that, we look at some of the other islands and they can be virtually silent on issues that are imperative to the well-being of their community. And that's just not the case on Molokai. So we already have innovation from the get-go. But then now I want to tell a story very quickly, and it pertains to how we actually create innovation. And back in the 1980s, there was at that point in time, refrigerators were actually the largest consumer of electricity in a residential home. And the Department of Energy and the federal government at that time created a challenge for appliance manufacturers by offering them almost a $2 million reward for improving the efficiency of refrigerators. And so many appliance companies came together and worked together and created a unpatented design for refrigerators that essentially reduced the electric demand of those appliances by 75%, which is monumental. And today we have, it's a very small fraction of the total energy that's consumed in individual homes, unless you have a very old one, in which case contact Hawaii Energy, because they can help you out on a rebate or get you a new refrigerator. So, but the idea at that point was, is that innovation follows incentives. And those incentives can come in the idea of whether it's social justice, it's just philanthropy, sorry, or it's actually monetary dollars to different organizations to basically make investments or to promote the development of untested or new ideas around energy and telecom, water, etc. So, for example, there's a new methodology that's been tested in Sweden about wastewater treatment plant that utilizes plants in this hydroponic type area to process wastewater in a way that's much more environmentally friendly, captures carbon. And so how can we bring those types of technologies to Molokai to be tested, and ultimately offer either incentives for those types of programs, or can just offering kind of a test bed in a closed, isolated environment where you have, a pretty constrained resource for water, as you discussed earlier. Other ideas that come to mind and knowing some of the energy needs for Molokai, and in particular end-of-line energy needs, where we have some reliability and resiliency issues and just power quality issues. One of the things that the Commission's been working towards, and actually is only the second state in the United States to create a microgrid service tariff, and we'll continue to work on this. But the idea would be to develop, microgrids at the ends of these lines, and if there could be grants and opportunities, there would be an opportunity for local residents to be trained up as microgrid operators, and that would be able to service homes and provide jobs and some security to residents, and to also provide backup for those power quality issues that we're seeing on the island. Of course, we have a tremendous challenge of getting to 2045 in the renewable energy environment. And I think, when we think about how we've done this to date, and including the last, I think it's about 12 PPAs that we've signed, there's been very, very little community interaction. I mean, you maybe have 12 people show up to some of these meetings. So they're not making decisions on behalf of the community. The community's voice isn't being heard. And a lot of the times it's because there's just not notification to the community that these are even happening. I know that they have a project that's being developed in my backyard, and I had no idea at all until the PPA was placed in front of me. And I was just like, is this how this works? So it's a real wake-up call, in thinking about how these projects are even being developed in Maui County. How are we being made aware? I think yesterday in particular was a perfect example of innovation, of being able to bring together several groups of, the consumer advocate, the co-op, the HUI, the commission, HECO, and to sit down at a table and to voice those concerns and to talk about ways to proceed and move forward in a way that's going to be consistent with the needs of the community. And that's innovation in itself. And that did not require any type of incentive. That was just truly the remarkable work that's been done on Molokai that's really incentivized and moved and propelled, these types of actions. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity as well with the electrification of transportation, that Molokai could serve as a test bed for providing not only vehicle to grid type integration where vehicles could provide grid services. As we go to renewable energy, there's going to be instability on our grids that is going to need to be addressed through other renewable resources that are more flexible. And so those types of tests have been done primarily in California and not in an isolated grid situation. And California has been trying to develop microgrids as well, but they haven't integrated sort of the goals of electrification of transportation into that. So there's opportunities there for that to become a testing ground alongside of electric vehicle chargers, and how those would be dispersed on an island that has pockets, it has load pockets, but they're actually distributed around the island. And so in a way of like, how do we get from point A to point B, and how are we serving that load and the demand there? Which came up yesterday about, centralization of power versus decentralized power. And I think it's really important that we take those into consideration, because things that we've been doing by the book with decentralized power plants, and then we talk about diversifying and going to DERs, that hasn't necessarily manifested in Molokai because some of the constraints that you faced as a result of this, the way that your grid is structured. So thinking about innovation as it relates to how we deliver energy to consumers is coupled with how consumers are actually utilizing energy as well. And so we need to be marrying those ideas of how is it that we can create a structure within Molokai and Maui County in general that harmonizes those two, the supply and the demand, in a way that can really benefit the people that are there and also provide jobs. So vehicle to grid, you would need mechanics that could work on electric vehicles. You would need people that could service the electric vehicle stations, charging stations. So as we continue to see technology evolve, hydrogen could come into play and could be an excellent resource on the island of Molokai, so that we have alternative resources that are clean energy resources. So there's a whole host of ideas of how how to kind of create this innovative test bed on the island that I can't necessarily get into, and I may not even have the right answer anyway. So, but the idea that there's so much work that's already been done by the residents of Molokai to represent the community interest is innovative in and of itself for the Hawaiian Islands. So.
Mahalo for calling it truly what it is, innovative. Yesterday was unprecedented, as Todd said, and truly innovative. And hopefully it's also precedent setting in uplifting other communities to do this kind of work in decentralizing. So mahalo for yesterday. And for those in the audience that don't speak acronym, PPA is Purchase Power Agreement, and DER, I'm guessing, is decentralized energy.
Yeah, distributed energy resources, but basically the same thing. Yeah. Sorry about that. I couldn't say earlier.
Just keeping everyone on the same page.
Thank you.
Sharing is awesome. Mahalo. And my last question is, you kind of touched upon this already, but would you say that this approach offers opportunities for economic diversification?
I absolutely would. And I do think that there are, as I mentioned, as we continue to evolve in the energy spectrum and even in the telecommunications space, there are going to be a tremendous number of jobs that are going to require skilled trade people to come and to work on the islands. And rather than importing them from elsewhere, let's ensure that we can keep it local and that we can keep those jobs for the people of Molokai, because there's absolutely no reason why others should move here and take over ownership in a place that has so much respect for the Aina, and that that really is truly looking out for the best interest of all the residents on the island. And so to keep that same sentiment is imperative. And there's one of the things that one of the state goals, I'm just going to add this as an aside, but one of the state goals around for decarbonization, not for basically carbon neutrality in particular. I mean, we can think about how Molokai could diversify how land is being utilized to have carbon sinks in areas where agricultural wouldn't be necessarily a possibility. And there would be a potential economic opportunity, not only for providing that service, because there is a social cost of carbon that we are identifying and we are now actually truly grasping and putting to the books, but provide jobs for those types of that really do not only improve the conditions of Molokai in terms of just carbon mitigation, but at the state of Hawaii as a whole and also the globe. So we all have to work together and battling this climate change and thinking about those opportunities for economic diversification through agriculture, through energy, through water, wastewater treatment, and through, there's a host of, we're evolving so quickly. And so how can we make sure that we stay on board and in touch with what those needs are? And I have no doubt that this community can do that. It's absolutely the one that can, if there's anyone. So definitely appreciate the question.
Mahalo, Jennifer. And, I think it would be appropriate right here to give a shameless plug to organizations that are doing that work in investing in workforce development within their communities, such as Makahana Ka'ike and Hana and the Makaha Learning Center on Oahu. Ho'ahu has been meeting with them to try to figure out how we can also use that model and that inspiration on Molokai as well. Mahalo. Our final panelist is Alex DeRode, Maui County's Energy Commissioner, whose job is to support the implementation of projects that address climate change in Maui County. My question for you, Alex, is will you please share with us your office's primary goal relevant to today's presentations, and specifically how you see the county's role in supporting ESG and impact investing that supports community goals?
Hello, Councilmember Rawlins-Fernandez. I want to also thank Shay and Ian following what our other speakers expressed for bringing us all together here today. I think it's important to have panels like this where we have, the county represented, the state represented, we have researchers at the table, we have community groups. So really a great cross-section of our community here to talk about this important topic. Yeah, a lot to cover, and 10 minutes we have together here to close out the panel. But I'm excited for those of you who don't know, to share that we have now within the County of Maui an Office of Climate Change, Resilience, and Sustainability. So for the acronym lovers, that's CCRS. And we're about a year into that office. And it's really, prior to that, my position, the Energy Commissioner, was housed in the Office of Economic Development. We also have our Resilience Officer and Environmental Coordinator, Makalea Ane, who works by my side on many projects related to climate action and environmental protection. And having this office now created within the county really elevates our role within the county, as well as opportunities to attract investment and other support from various sources, whether it's federal funds, state funds, or attracting even private investment to our community. So I think that's an exciting development. It's a big job. We have a staff of 2, and we're hoping to grow as resources become available. And so right now, really our primary role is that of facilitators, subject matter experts. We're out there both within the county organization itself, as well as with out in the community, and working with partners such as the PUC and Hawaii State Energy Office and others, to really try to bring as many resources to the county as possible to help these climate action efforts. We do rely on this kind of team approach, right? 2 people in an office can't do it all. And this is something that we have to tackle as a community, as a as partners. So that's really what I see our primary role being, is facilitators, subject matter experts. One example of how we do that is being a resource on community groups. So such as those that Todd and Jenny were sharing. We were there as a resource, for example, for the Molokai Clean Energy Hui, helping them figure out, how can they leverage some of the resources the county has available? How can they engage with various partners throughout the state as well? And so we can play that kind of a facilitation role in that respect. Another group that we do that with is the Climate Action Advisory Committee, or CAAC, which is active here on Maui Island. So those are some examples of engaging with community groups. I think in terms of how we attract capital to support climate action efforts, there's kind of three main ways, and there are probably more that I'm not thinking of right at the moment. But one way is to set ourselves up so that we are, I don't love the term shovel ready, but basically we're setting ourselves up so that when funds do become available, whether it's through the federal government or the state, that we have projects in the pipeline ready to fund, right? We're not scrambling to get grant applications together. They're usually on a very aggressive timeline, and it's easy to not be able to make it in time, right? So trying to get those kind of projects and plans set up to be able to attract funding. Another aspect is trying to help reduce the cost of county operations. All right, so if we can reduce energy costs, if we can reduce waste costs associated with waste, and also look at how do we turn some liabilities into resources, right? So an example would be waste streams, right? Our solid waste. How do we look at that as a resource that could, for example, be a source of energy or power for the county? So helping departments, for example, our Department of Environmental Management, who's been looking into waste to energy opportunities for several years. How do we help them kind of navigate that and find what opportunities are out there? And then in terms of reducing county operations, we have set budgets for departments, operational budgets year after year, and how can we kind of leverage those rather than just saying we have to fund through traditional budget to budget, year to year budgets? How can we look at opportunities like energy savings performance contracting, where outside investment comes in and helps take that burden off of the county? Now that capital gets freed up to fund other operational needs or opportunities for our communities. All right, so that's something we're actively working on, hoping to have that kicked off by the end of this calendar year or early next year in terms of energy savings performance contracting, or ESPC for the acronym lovers. Lastly, I think one way that we help to make more capital available for the county and the county taxpayers is try to help reduce risks that are out there, right? Investors don't want to come into an environment where there's a perception of high risk. How vulnerable is our infrastructure? How are we addressing both climate mitigation and climate adaptation, right? If we're not doing that in a way that brings confidence to investors that we're going to try to minimize and turn things around, minimize risk and turn things around along those lines, they're going to be less apt to want to invest in our community. So those are some ways that we're trying to help make our community more attractive for investment. I'll mention some ways we do that is by going out there and looking at what are the best practices, what are some of the frameworks out there that help us as communities to do that, right? A lot of communities around the world are doing this type of work. We shouldn't completely reinvent the wheel here locally. We want to look at, let's take those best practices, those frameworks out there, the lessons learned from other communities, and then adapt it to our own context, right? Because every community is unique. So we're doing that through interaction with organizations such as USDN, Urban Sustainability Directors Network, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, Climate Mayors is another organization. And it's really bringing these frameworks for climate action, for resiliency to our community, and then having our community engage and be part of the process of developing, for example, a joint climate action and resilience plan that we're about to be kicking off here in July. So we look forward to having people participate in that process. I'll mention one last kind of initiative that we're involved in. It's called Race to Zero, and it's through ACLE, Local Governments for Sustainability. County Council has been involved in helping to get the county on board with that, as well as the mayor's office. So it's a real collaboration between the council and the administration. And we're looking at having carbon neutrality targets for Maui County, and having that be tied into our plans, our joint climate action resilience plan with interim targets. So we have actually clear actions and goals that we're trying to hit. And that those can also be set up to attract investment. So there's a lot more I could talk about, but I'm going to end it there. And thank you for the questions.
Mahalo, Alex. What an incredible discussion today on sustainable 21st century solutions that incorporate Indigenous values with very concrete examples. We've been getting some amazing questions and comments, and also been receiving requests for further discussions. For those interested, we will be sending out a follow-up email after the panel to all attendees and registrants. With the remaining 7-ish minutes that we have with our time today, I'd like to try to tackle a few of the questions that we received. If we don't get to your question, our organizers at the Maui ESG project will respond to you after. And mahalo to Shay and Imogen for helping to answer some of those questions already. So the first question is for Stephanie. Is there a threshold size for a foundation portfolio for it to best be cost effective to bring someone like you in as a consultant? Can you work with groups of foundations together?
That's a great question. We work with both what we call accredited and non-accredited investors. So we primarily focus on activating individuals and organizations with $10 million or more, but increasingly we're working with organizations that and low and middle income individuals to teach them how to invest through community notes, as an example, in microfinance organizations. So the answer is yes. And if we would be happy to sit down and talk about a collaboration with you and how we can take our education and infrastructure and help you learn to teach the people that want to invest in your communities and give them the investor education they need.
Mahalo, Stephanie. Did anyone else want to add on to what Stephanie was sharing? I wasn't sure if I saw a hand. Okay. If not, we'll go on to the next question. And the question is for Jason. Is anyone in Hawaii looking into blue carbon projects?
Well, I do not know if anyone in Hawaii is looking into blue carbon projects, but I know people all over the world are looking into blue carbon projects. It's a very interesting new market. Not a lot of things have actually been done where carbon credits have been sold from blue carbon. But there are quite a few nonprofits and project developers and other people who are trying to figure out ways to do blue carbon projects. Hawaii would be a perfect place to do that. We actually are an investor in at least one project, which is a sustainable seafood project in Hawaii, and we would love to know about anything people are doing in the state that could qualify for blue carbon. So it's an exciting new area. I don't know of any projects, but I wonder if anyone else on the panel does. I know that Kate mentioned some carbon sinks, and some other people might have too. So I don't know if you meant blue carbon as well.
Mahalo, Jason. Okay, I don't see any hands. So maybe we can investigate a little more after this panel. Okay, our next question is, I guess for anyone on the panel that would like to take a stab at it. How business typically measures financial value, measures success, established valuations are linked to P&L and balance sheet assessments, which are dated 20th century tools that fail to recognize ESG intangibles and their associated value. Do you see issues with traditional accounting metrics used by investors in every description?
I'm happy to take a quick pass at that if you'd like. So what I would say to that is that, yes, the tools to measure impact, the tools to measure value are pretty narrow, right? We know that. So this is just one more way that ESG investors and Indigenous peoples can work together to create the scorecard for measuring value. So I think, yes, what needs to happen is a bigger conversation around what those metrics are and what they can be. But to use an example from my own experience, investors are often like, what's social value? How do I measure that? What does that mean? Well, I know from working with tribes in the continental US that a lot of tribal enterprises hire people. Employment is a goal of the enterprise as much as revenue. The point is to drive a local economy. So you actually have this really cool social metric because you're employing a large part of the community, even if it's a smaller revenue, and you have an internship program. So there's ways to develop metrics that mean something to everyone. So I do think that it needs to be a wider conversation about how to develop metrics. And I would say FPIC, when you have a framework of FPIC, it just provides the opportunity to ask those questions. How are you measuring value? What does that mean? How can we quantify that? And my experience is that Indigenous peoples, tribes, and movements already know. It's just a matter of putting that in front of investors, putting it into a spreadsheet, and
Mahalo, Kate. Okay, I see Alex with his hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up to Kate's response that I think in terms of determining how we assess value, that can be done in many different contexts, right? Whether it's to attract investment or if you're going out for financing. One way I'll share with our audience here today is within the county, when we go out for procurement, when we go out for request for proposals on projects, rather than just basing how you award a contract on lowest price, right, lowest bid, we're putting into RFP criteria that bring best value for the county. And one way to interpret that is, for example, what type of experience does a potential bidder or proposer have with integrating equity or leading with equity in the work that they do? What type of additional climate action value can they bring to whatever project they're proposing under? So those are some ways that we can assess value, and then how some of the county funds are then allocated to these projects are more in line with our community goals and values.
Mahalo, Alex. Okay, and we're almost to that time, so I have one last question, and it'll be for Todd. It says, mahalo to you and your team for everything that you're doing. It seems the Ho'ahu model is precisely what communities across Hawaii are calling for to lead the equitable transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. What advice would you give to other community-based organizations who want to replicate this model? How can the state, HECO, and other key stakeholders support you and others like you?
Thank you for that question. You know, we're really lucky to be on Molokai. We're a really close-knit community, and actually, you know, we do get asked the question a lot. You know, like, hey, Oahu is not like Molokai. We're not close-knit. You know, how do we get things started? You know, and what I can say is, you know, go start in a personal place. You know, what are the things of value to you? What places are valuable to you? What things in your community are valuable to you? You know, what is it that you're passionate about? Have those conversations, have those dialogues with the people that you love, with the people in your community. And I think you'll find that there are a lot of people in your communities that are like-minded. There are a lot of people that just can't wait to start community building, but they just haven't, you know, been given permission or, you know, teamed up with anybody to do it. We cannot underestimate the power of having a facilitator here on Molokai. Our good friend Ali with Shake Energy has been a friend of mine for many years, and very early on, while she was still in school, she partnered with us. She came to us just to ask, hey, Molokai, what is it? I'm curious. How does your community work, and what are your needs? How do you care for your resources? And that dialogue has led us down this really interesting road. And so I would also reach out to, you know, potential developers out there listening in, you know, have the same dialogue with your community members, you know, and let's discover how we can community grow together.
Perfect. Mahalo, Todd. I would like to mahalo all our panelists. Incredible mana'o today. Thank you for sharing your ike with all of us today, and for all the amazing work that you're doing in the community. Mahalo to everyone in the audience for joining us today. And again, please watch for an email from the Maui ESG project on how to join in further conversations after today. Mahalo again. Aloha.